Intellectual passion drives out sensuality. My definition of an intellectual is someone who can listen to the William Tell Overture without thinking of the Lone Ranger. The first duty of government is to see that people have food, fuel, and clothes. The second, that they have means of moral and intellectual education. Globalization has changed us into a company that searches the world, not just to sell or to source, but to find intellectual capital, the world's best talents and greatest ideas. Hackers are breaking the systems for profit. Before, it was about intellectual curiosity in pursuit of knowledge and thrill, and now hacking is big business. What is now called green architecture is an opportunistic caricature of a much deeper consideration of the issues related to sustainability that architecture has been engaged with for many years. It was one of the first professions that was deeply concerned with these issues and that had an intellectual response to them. One of the secrets of life is to keep our intellectual curiosity acute. The main part of intellectual education is not the acquisition of facts, but learning how to make facts live. Nature holds the key to our aesthetic, intellectual, cognitive and even spiritual satisfaction. Intellectual property has the shelf life of a banana. I'm a teller of stories. I put bloody skins on my back and dance around the fire, and I say what the hunt was like. It's not erudite, it's not intellectual. I sail, run dogs, ride horses, play professional poker, and tell stories about the stuff I've been through. And I'm still a romantic, I still want Bambi to make it out of the fire. Where you don't have people who have strong intellectual capacity, you get demagoguery. Interpretation is the revenge of the intellectual upon art. Blind commitment to a theory is not an intellectual virtue, it is an intellectual crime. We start out 1,000,000 years ago in a small community on some grassy plain, we hunt animals, have children, and develop a rich social, sexual, and intellectual life, but we know almost nothing about our surroundings. An intellectual is a man who takes more words than necessary to tell more than he knows. An intellectual is a man who doesn't know how to park a bike. The demand for certainty is one which is natural to man, but is nevertheless an intellectual vice. Nothing contributes so much to tranquilize the mind as a steady purpose, a point on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. All work is noble. The only ignoble thing is to live without working. There is need to realize the value of work in all its forms, whether manual or intellectual, to be called mate, to have sympathetic understanding of all forms of activity. Religion is part of the human makeup. It's also part of our cultural and intellectual history. Religion was our first attempt at literature, the texts, our first attempt at cosmology, making sense of where we are in the universe, our first attempt at health care, believing in faith healing. Our first attempt at philosophy. Socialism in general has a record of failure so blatant that only an intellectual could ignore or evade it. It contributes greatly towards a man's moral and intellectual health, to be brought into habits of companionship with individuals unlike himself, who care little for his pursuits, and whose sphere and abilities he must go out of himself to appreciate. It seems to me that the natural world is the greatest source of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living. The avoidance of taxes is the only intellectual pursuit that still carries any reward. Those who desire to rise as high as our human condition allows, must renounce intellectual pride, the omnipotence of clear thinking, belief in the absolute power of logic. The color of the skin is in no way connected with strength of the mind or intellectual powers. Live a life full of humility, gratitude, intellectual curiosity, and never stop learning. The three hardest tasks in the world are neither physical feats nor intellectual achievements, but moral acts, to return love for hate, to include the excluded, and to say, I was wrong. Intuition is the key to everything, in painting, filmmaking, business, everything. I think you could have an intellectual ability, but if you can sharpen your intuition, which they say is emotion and intellect joining together, then a knowingness occurs. The social sciences offer equal promise for improving human welfare. Our lives can be greatly improved through a deeper understanding of individual and collective behavior. But to realize this promise, the social sciences, like the natural sciences, need to match their institutional structures to today's intellectual challenges. Without moral and intellectual independence, there is no anchor for national independence. If socialism can only be realized when the intellectual development of all the people permits it, then we shall not see socialism for at least 500 years. I'm grateful to intelligent people. That doesn't mean educated. That doesn't mean intellectual. I mean really intelligent. What black old people used to call mother wit means intelligence that you had in your mother's womb. That's what you rely on. You know what's right to do. As the humanities and liberal arts are downsized, privatized, and commodified, higher education finds itself caught in the paradox of claiming to invest in the future of young people while offering them few intellectual, civic, and moral supports. No great intellectual thing was ever done by great effort. God is a metaphor for that which transcends all levels of intellectual thought. It's as simple as that. I read in the newspapers they are going to have 30 minutes of intellectual stuff on television every Monday from 7:30 to 8. To educate America. They couldn't educate America if they started at 6:30. We are all racing towards death. No matter how many great, intellectual conclusions we draw during our lives, we know they're all only man-made, like God. I begin to wonder where it all leads. What can you do, except do what you can do as best you know how? Pol Pot, he rounded up anybody he thought was intellectual and had them executed. And how he told someone was intellectual or not was whether they wore glasses. If they're that clever, take them off when they see him coming. An intellectual is a person who's found one thing that's more interesting than sex. Being an intellectual creates a lot of questions and no answers. Physical fitness is not only one of the most important keys to a healthy body, it is the basis of dynamic and creative intellectual activity. To label me an intellectual is a misunderstanding of what that is. I am politically incorrect, that's true. Political correctness to me is just intellectual terrorism. I find that really scary, and I won't be intimidated into changing my mind. Everyone isn't going to love you all the time. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. We do not need more intellectual power, we need more spiritual power. We do not need more of the things that are seen, we need more of the things that are unseen. Great minds are to make others great. Their superiority is to be used, not to break the multitude to intellectual vassalage, not to establish over them a spiritual tyranny, but to rouse them from lethargy, and to aid them to judge for themselves. Europeans are much more serious than we are in America because they think that a good place to discuss intellectual matters is a beer party. An intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.